What's up, and welcome to the Unwatchables. My name is Kylie, and I'm joined here with Marcus.
Hey, how's it going, everybody?
Today, we are going to talk about the Big Friendly Giant, and I'm going to go into a little synopsis and then we'll get right into it. So, 10-year-old Sophie is in for the adventure of a lifetime when she meets the Big Friendly Giant. Naturally scared at first, the young girl soon realizes that the 24-foot behemoth is actually quite gentle and charming. As their friendship grows, Sophie's presence attracts the unwanted attention of Blood Bottler, Flesh Lump Eater, and other giants. After traveling to London, Sophie and the BFG must convince Queen Elizabeth to help them get rid of all the bad giants once and for all. Marcus, what did you think?
So, I feel like with this movie, it was directed by Spielberg and it was written by, or the story is based on a book written by Dahl. And, I don't know, I feel like when it comes to Spielberg's work, I kind of feel like there's definitely multiple different Spielbergs. There's the Spielberg of, Jurassic Park, E.T., that kind of child-friendly content Spielberg. And there's kind of that adult level stuff where he's been doing recently, like Bridge of Spies and The Post and Lincoln. And yeah, I guess this kind of like harkens back to his older stuff, like E.T. and Jurassic Park a little bit, which I kind of thought was refreshing because, you don't really see that type of movie really get made that much anymore. But with that being said, there's definitely some things about it that were kind of weird, and some things that maybe I didn't necessarily love. But yeah, what were your overall impressions of it?
Well, if we're talking about Spielberg, I think that, in the past, especially with Jurassic Park and E.T., there were just so many, like, mystical, magical moments in those movies. And I think that this movie was his chance to kind of bring back some of that. But for me, it kind of fell short. And so I was a little bit bummed about that. I don't think that he really harnessed his old magic. And so that's kind of where I'm standing with it. I thought that it was okay, but I don't think that it really lived up to its potential.
Well, I think when you talk about this idea of Spielberg's old magic, you know, I really don't know if it really even exists anymore. Because I've been thinking about that. I feel like Spielberg, like in my opinion, I feel like Robert Zemeckis, Peter Jackson, and Spielberg were probably the biggest casualties when it came to directors when like we had the transition into heavy CG or computer generated effects in films. And I kind of feel like all three of them suffered from it. Like if you look at their work pre the big CG explosion, like in the mid thousands, their work I just feel like was a lot better. So you look at like Robert Zemeckis. I mean, most of his films today are either human dramas, but when he tries to do CG, a lot of it looks terrible.
Yeah, I think
Like the
that
Welcome to Marwindale, that film like trash, like the CG.
I think that the lack of CG, it forced them to be a little bit more creative, with what they did. And they had that giant robotic T-Rex, for
Mm.
Jurassic Park, and they had the big robotic Jaws shark that broke down every 30 minutes or whatever, but I think it made them a lot more creative with what they had to work with.
Mm. So I guess to kind of get back on track a little bit with BFG, what were some things for the film that didn't work for you? Like, what were some things that you felt like, oh, that was kind of weird or that was kind of stupid?
So for me, I feel like the slow pacing, the fact that this movie was 2 hours long, I feel like for a children's movie, that's far too long. I think it could have been cut down to about an hour and a half. There were just a lot of scenes that were really drug out. There were a lot of scenes that just felt like filler that I don't think were really necessary. So things like that were just sort of a turn off to me. What about you?
Yeah, I mean, I definitely felt like it went slow. Like I remember watching the film. I think I saw it by myself on like a Friday or Saturday night. I went and saw like one of the last showings of it. I think I went and watched this film alone, and then I hung out with a friend afterwards, I believe. And so when I saw it, it was like 9:30 or 10 o'clock showing. So I felt like the movie went on like a really long time. Like even though I kind of liked it overall, like there were things about the film that I definitely liked, and I kind of felt like some of the atmosphere around the film were pretty good. But actually watching it itself, it just seemed kind of a little bit like it dragged. One thing that I feel like it really didn't work for me either was the voice, the accent of the BFG. I kind of felt like I know the actor that does his voice, and who also was the person that was the physical like actor for him. I know that the person is English, but in the film, yeah, I feel like his voice kind of fluctuated.
He
Like,
was like Scottish or something.
yeah, something like that. And I feel like in the movie, there's just some ways that he talked at certain points. It just sounded really bizarre. Like, I don't know, like really clunky. Did you kind of get that feeling too?
Yeah, I mean, I know that it's characteristic of the big friendly giant from the book that he would, mispronounce words and he'd make up his own words. And I think that that's charming in a way, but the fact that on top of that, he had this like weird sort of Scottish accent on top of that, I sometimes struggled to understand what he was saying. And so, in that regard, the audience for this movie is obviously children. I don't know how they could possibly understand what was going on at all, because if I was younger, I don't think I'd be able to understand what he was even saying half the time.
No, I mean that's a very good point. I mean, there's large swaths of the film where like, yeah, it's just yeah, it is very clanky, and especially too for kids in America where they're listening to this British girl talk to this British guy doing a Scottish accent, making up words. I could definitely see how they could get a little lost in all of that. Like you said, I mean, so you got like clanky dialogue, and then mixed with like these bizarre kind of fanciful words that aren't real, or like they sound kind of fanciful. That is kind of confusing. Another thing I wasn't a huge fan of was the whole palace scene. What did you think about that and this
Oh,
length of time?
yeah, that was one of the ones I was going to point out was just far too long. And I mean, there were even just pauses where there was no dialogue and there wasn't really anything going on. They were just kind of eating. And the whole time I was thinking, why did they just cut this out? Why did they even have this whole scene? And the whole point, I guess, the end result of that scene was just that everyone sort of got on board with the giant. But it seemed like they were already on his side in the first place if they set up a whole big meal for him. So I just kind of thought that that scene could have been removed from the movie.
Hmm. Did you feel like I don't know when I was watching it? I definitely kind of got this little hint of I don't. I mean, I also describe it like this kind of weird idea of like this adult man kidnapping this little girl at night. Like, I mean, I know like in the story they want to make it seem like it's very benign and just normal. I guess like nothing weird, but when I was literally watching it, I kind of got a little bit of a does this feel? It felt a little weird to me. I don't know. What did you think?
Um, I didn't think too much of it. I mean, I know that he took her because she saw him, and so he technically didn't really have a choice. But I kind of know what you're talking about. There was one moment when I think he was like holding her up in his hands or something and he was just gazing super lovingly at her. That part was a little bit weird to me, but other than that, I didn't really catch any weird vibes.
Yeah, and I mean even stuff like that too. I mean, there's I don't know. I guess there's a little bit of that line between okay, it's okay for children to befriend older people in the right context, and there's nothing necessarily evil about it. But I don't know. Also, like what you said too or alluded to. I mean, there's a physical thing of what we're seeing, which is this old hermit guy kidnapping a young girl, and like
Yeah.
it definitely for me it kind of felt a little weird. But I mean, I also get it too that for the sake of saying true to the story, authentic to the story, that's how it went down. But I mean, we'll probably get to this in the next one. But I feel like for myself, I feel like it would have been a little better. Would have been something like Elf. You know how Buddy gets to the North Pole because he sneaks in the bag. I almost think that something like that would have been a little better, where she somehow got stuck in his bag or something,
Mm.
or he accidentally, inadvertently kidnapped her or something like that. So when she just woke up, she's like, "Where the heck am I?" Rather
Yeah.
than
Taking her out of her bed.
yeah,
Yeah.
but yeah, it's just I don't know. To me, I definitely kind of got like, "Whoa, this is a little weird."
Yeah, I got that as well. Um, in terms of other things that kind of turned me off, this might seem harsh, but I'm not really a fan of Ruby Barnhill. She played Sophie, the little girl. And in my opinion, I just feel like she wasn't super convincing. And I get that, it's a lot of work when you're pretty much just acting alone and you don't really have that many visual cues and you're not really with any other actors in front of you. But I just think that in my opinion, I think if we replaced Ruby Barnhill with Millie Bobby Brown from Stranger Things, I think the movie would have been totally different because I feel like Millie Bobby Brown just has this like this attitude, this she's a little bit sassy. She just has a lot more oomph to her, and I feel like I don't know. I just feel like the Sophie in this movie was a little bit one dimensional. I don't think that she was a super fun character to follow in all this.
No, she definitely was very flat or one dimensional. Like before we started this, Kylie mentioned to me, she's like, "Oh, this Millie Bobby Brown," and the first thing I thought of was the singer Bobby Brown. And if Bobby Brown was in this movie as the girl, it would have been a totally different movie. I mean, it would have been like a joke. It would have been like a sketch from like In Living Color or something like that. It would have been radically different movie. But yeah, I guess that kind of leads into the next part of well, because obviously to a lot of these, a lot of these unwatchables, it's primarily been just trashing on the film and nothing really constructive. But I kind of wanted to do a little thing where maybe we talk about what we would have changed, what would have made it, like a good movie. So I guess, yeah, what would be some of the things that you would have changed that you think could have made it like go from a to like, okay, this is like an 8.
So first, recast the lead. But the second big thing for me was that the movie felt really dark, and I feel like especially for a kids movie, you'd want it to feel a little bit more mystical. And I think that the sequences with where he was creating the dream, I thought that was really cool, and I think that the movie would have benefited from a little bit more of that and maybe a little bit more color. I just feel like the whole movie was really dark, a lot of blues and blacks, and I don't know. I just think that the landscape of the Giants could have been a little bit more pretty, maybe. I mean, I guess in the end of the movie when he had his whole vegetable patch, that was cool, and it was a little bit more mystical. But I just think visually it could have been a little bit more pleasing, a little bit more colorful and fun. You know.
Mm. I think one thing I would have liked to have seen. I mean, I agree with all those points that you raised. I feel like one thing I would have liked to have seen maybe would have been Wes Anderson into this film, because Wes Anderson, he adapted another doll book, that being The Fantastic Mr. Fox, and I really like The Fantastic Mr. Fox. I feel like that's one of Wes Anderson's best movies. I feel like if he had worked on BFG, I think it could have been a lot different. Because even though, like I said with the BFG, I didn't necessarily hate it, but I also felt like the whole film was pretty much predicated upon like old Spielberg magic meets like contemporary filmmaking and contemporary like CGI and things like that, which I think is okay, but I don't really know if Spielberg can really direct his old movies anymore and have them be great. Like, I don't think he's directed a film that feels like Spielberg. I don't think he's made a film that's been good in like a long time. Like, I'm trying to think of what the last one would be. Like, I guess his last attempts were Ready Player One and maybe like War of the Worlds that came out like in whatever it was, the mid 2000s. And I kind of feel like for both of those films, they both kind of failed at that a little bit. And I kind of feel with BFG, I definitely, wanted to feel like that. But yeah, when you're watching it, it almost, I don't know, it's almost like you're watching a copy of a copy. Like, I feel like when you're watching BFG, you're watching a person copy Spielberg, or you're watching a person copying a copy of Spielberg. It's almost like in Plato's Cave, or not Plato's Cave, Plato's Republic, where he talks about the realm of the forms, and he's like, like a chair in our world represents chair in in the realm, in the whatever the realm of the forms. So we don't actually really sit on a real chair; we're sitting on a representation of that. I almost feel like that with BFG, where it's like it kind of knows what Spielberg was or is, and it's just kind of trying to replicate that. And it kind of fails, I feel like, in certain regards. Like, I feel like the same way very much so about Ready Player One, which I think was one of the first movies you ever reviewed, I think. And yeah, it also tries to copy a lot of the same beats as Spielberg used to have, but just not as good, I guess, as his old stuff.
Yeah, I mean, for me, I think that Spielberg also thrives when he has really good actors, when he has a really good cast that can also kind of see his vision. And I don't know, I just feel like there was a lack of believability for me, and I don't know if it's because I'm not a child, but just a lot of the humor fell short for me, and I I just didn't really buy it a lot of the time, and it felt really corny to me, especially with the Queen and all the scenes that she was in. It was just kind of tacky to me.
Hmm. I can agree with that, and I definitely feel like yeah, the movie could have been a little bit more colorful and just like funny and lighthearted. Like it still kind of had. I mean, because the film came out in 2016, and it kind of. I think that the film came out towards the end of that phase of like kind of darker-ish looking blockbusters that came out like in the late 2000s and mid 2000s. Like a lot of films in that era kind of looked dark, and their posters were dark, and the films were dark themselves. So I kind of feel like BFG also kind of got caught up in that. But yeah, like the parts like you mentioned where they're like in that in between phase of worlds where there's that tree. Like I feel like more things there could have been cooler, more things that were fantastical or just really colorful and not hanging out in his like like
His little shack.
yeah, his
Kinda
little
his
like
little
crappy
rock.
looking shack, right? Like
Yeah.
I wasn't really that impressed by that.
I know, I feel like over 50% of the movie took place just in his little house thing.
Yeah.
And I don't feel like that was very exciting. But I thought that, his job, his whole dream catching, dream creating thing was really cool, but I don't think that they explored that as much as they could have,
I definitely think there was a little bit of trying to think of how to describe it. I guess a little bit of wasted potential. So I guess when it comes, at least in your opinion, when it comes to Spielberg's lesser fantasy movies, where would you say that this one ranks? Like, would you say this film is worse or better than like War of the Worlds or Hook? That came out in the early '90s with Robin Williams. Like, I never saw Tintin. I've
I
kind of
haven't either.
so I don't really guess know how that compares to that. But how would you compare to War of the Worlds and Hook and maybe even like a Jurassic Park 2 or the Goonies, like that kind of more of kid fantasy that Spielberg used to work on or used to produce.
I think I might be a little bit biased just because I think that a lot of older movies are better than modern movies. So I feel like I haven't seen The Goonies in a long time, but I remember loving it. I think that, oh, that's hard. I think it might be better than Jurassic Park 2.
Mm.
Definitely not better than 1 because that's one of my favorite movies of all time. But definitely not as good as Hook. I really like Hook. Yeah, so I mean, it kind of just falls in that sort of mediocre zone for me.
I completely agree with you. I personally really love Hook. I remember as also as a kid just watching Hook, and I thought it was a really good movie. And one thing that I liked about Hook, and even BFG kind of had a little bit of this element, is kind of this idea of even though the content is created for children, it still has a little bit of like a sadness overlayer to it, or kind of has a little bit of a sense of like something's been lost or someone's passed away. And I know a lot of children or content produced for children now, or even really for adults, it doesn't really have that element. But you look at a lot of like Spielberg stuff, and there is always kind of that layer of something lost. Even look at like Jurassic Park, where obviously people died, but none of the good people died. But at the end of the film, like what was lost? Like the dream was lost, right? So like the dream of a park with dinosaurs, like when they're flying away, you kind of get the idea of like, okay, the dream is dead, right? Then like in Hook, I mean, it's a very similar thing where, Peter is he's let his child die, right? And now he's this old kind of or middle-aged grumpy business person, and there's kind of that theme running throughout it where something it's kind of died and it kind of feels like that. And then literally at the end of Hook, Rufio dies and it's like, okay, like there really are consequences. And I feel like with BFG, it also kind of had that. I mean, the girl was an orphan. She didn't really like have a lot, and her place in the world is very, downtrodden. And so is the BFG himself. He was also kind of the runt of the giants or whatever. And I just feel like there's not really a lot of movies made like that today. Like movies that kind of had this idea of talking about like loss or like an overlayer of like something actually negative happening in the world.
Yeah, I mean, especially for kids' movies, I think a lot of them are super just light and fluffy these days. So yeah, I mean, I'm not totally a fan of that. I'm more of an optimistic moviegoer, so I prefer the happy endings. I mean, this did have a happy ending, I'll say that, but obviously her start and throughout the movie, she was really out of place and obviously didn't fit in, and even though she wanted to go back, the giant was keeping her there and whatever. It just seemed like she was never really winning until the very end, which I guess the queen adopted her. Is that what happened?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah.
It's quite a fantastical ending.
I mean, I typically too. I mean, I very much like, I like the positive endings, but sometimes, I don't know, sometimes you need to see films that aren't necessarily so positive or, end in at least for myself, I like to occasionally watch the films where it's like, oh, what? It ended there? Like, there's a film that came out last year that I really liked. It's a film called Juliet Naked, and it had Ethan Hawke in it. And basically, at the end of the film, I guess, whatever, spoilers for that one, it's very up in the air, like if he gets with a girl or not. And, there's a part of me that's like, oh, come on, like, you gotta show it. Are you kidding me? This whole movie, and then we don't know for sure. And, there's other films like that too. You look at it, like even a film like Seven Samurai where, the village has been saved, but like half the samurai are dead. And it's kind of like, all right, it's a little bittersweet, but, yeah, sometimes I kind of like to see those rather than just, everything gets tied up in a nice big bow and everything's like beautiful. And I mean, like you mentioned with this film, I mean, it ended in a positive light. Like the BFG was happy, she was happy, but it still kind of had that element of sadness. I think a lot of Dahl's books kind of had that overlay too, where they kind of felt like something a little off center in the world. And, there was, depression and stuff. I mean, even when you watch the old Charlie and the Chocolate Factory movie or Willy Wonka, you definitely get that feeling throughout the whole thing.
Really dark, especially the tunnel scene.
Yeah, well, it's dark, and like the kids too. I mean, the kids are like, committing basically like sins, and then they're being punished for it, right? And I know in the Charlie and the Chocolate, well, I guess that was the old Willy Wonka, the one with Gene Wilder, but in the 2004, 2005 version, whatever year it was, that had Johnny Depp in it. With that one, I mean, you see that the kids are actually okay. That, they're able to like leave at the end, so they're not dead like in Willy Wonka. But they're still, I mean, in that one, it looks darker. His father was a dentist that really kind of terrorized him. And yeah, it felt kind of dark. In Fantastic Mr. Fox, I feel like if Wes Anderson didn't inject so much Anderson into the film, if he didn't inject so much of himself into it, I think we probably would have also felt that same thing. And, James and the Giant Peach, the same way, where it just feels like there's just something weird about the way that it feels. Yeah. And BFG kind of had a little bit, but I don't know. I'm okay with that stuff on occasion, I guess.
Well, if you like sort of the bittersweet feel, then I definitely recommend that you see Pet Sematary.
I did see Pet Sematary.
Oh, you did?
Yeah.
How did you like it?
I thought it was like okay. I mean, it wasn't. I didn't hate it. I didn't really like love it either. I guess I like Jason Clarke.
I like him.
I don't know how I would feel about him. Like, I really liked him in the second The Planet of the Apes movie, but I also thought he was terrible in Terminator Genesis. So,
well, maybe we should talk about Pet Sematary next.
Yeah,
because I kind of feel the same way.
Yeah, I feel like Pet Sematary was worse than It the Clown.
Oh, definitely.
I feel like you can make that comparison, but
we're getting off topic.
Yeah. Well, I guess we'll say that for next episode. But yeah, I guess so. Kylie, what was your grade for it?
My grade for it, I think because I'm not the intended audience, I am going to give it a no timer. I think if you're an adult, maybe, sit your kid in front of it. It's worth them seeing it once. But for yourself, I don't think you're really going to get much out of this movie. It's kind of tacky. It's a little bit too long. So I'm going to give it a no timer. What about you?
Yeah, I mean, I feel like for myself, I'd say it's a one timer. Like, I remember walking out of it, and thinking to myself, like, oh, this movie's okay. I think if you're a big Spielberg fan, I guess you might like it, but yeah, I mean, I don't know. I would say it's probably a one-timer. I mean, I feel like for myself, yeah, if it was a little bit more colorful, if it was recasted, and if the CG was done a little different on the other Giants, except for the BFG, I think it could have been a better movie. So yeah, I would say it's probably a one-timer, but yeah, it wasn't terrible. We have reviewed movies that I thought were way worse. I thought The Two Purges were worse. I thought Mortal Engines was worse. I thought Minions was way worse. So this definitely isn't in that category or realm. But all All right. Well, I guess that probably wraps it up for this episode. Definitely make sure to check us out on iTunes and Spotify. And yeah, we got a lot of cool content on the channel. We got a number of interviews that are coming out and a number of ones that are out right now that are pretty good. Then we also got the Domcast. So definitely make sure to check out other content. Thank you for listening.